Hi everyone, my name is Joey and I work at Dubsado. Today I'm going to be showing a bit of a presentation on how you can use Dubsado, our tool, as your all-in-one business suite to help with all of your client management needs, whatever that might be. But before I dig in, I do have to say thank you to LaShawn for reaching out. We're really grateful for the opportunity and I hope you can all benefit from it. Whether you operate your own tax services business or something in a field adjacent, really any service-based business, our goal is to sort of be this one-stop shop where you can use all the tools that we have to hopefully run everything behind the scenes of your business. Whether you're using a current CRM or business tool at the moment, whether you're a seasoned vet or if you're just starting out your business, I hope that this is going to be beneficial for you. One thing I will say is that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to use it. It really does depend on what you know your needs are, what you know your process to be. So take everything most definitely with a grain of salt. It's not matter of or it's not a matter of using every single bell and whistle, I should say. It's more so like, of the tools available, which ones are the ones that are going to save me the most time and provide the most benefit in terms of time saving or making things as efficient as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and share my screen. So what you are all seeing now is our Dubsado dashboard. And again, we are considered a client management system. Essentially, any little bit and piece of your process, from the moment somebody inquires about your business all the way up until you are done performing whatever service for them. Hopefully you can handle that entire transaction within Dubsado. So I'll go ahead and I'll dig in, and hopefully this will give some insight as to the different ways that you can use it depending on your process. So just to get the ball rolling, I will say that whenever you're actually taking clients and you're putting them into the system, those clients are actually what we would call projects. And as a project, there's actually two default categories. We have something called lead projects. These are more so like prospects or inquiries. So however which way someone inquires when they are put into the system for the first time, these are people that are interested but they have yet to purchase or move forward or sign any kind of contract, something like that. And then of course your job projects are just your full-blown clients. The reason why I mention that is because the page that you're all seeing now is something that we call our project dashboard. And this will actually show you, all the different people that you're speaking with, regardless of where they're at in the mix or where you might have categorized them as. So this page is definitely quite important. This is sort of like your top-down view for showing you all the different people that you're speaking with, regardless of their status. With that said, if not for anything else, you'll always have the ability to scroll through your list. You can search somebody's name or perhaps company name in that search bar above, things like that. But there are a couple other ways that you can filter and navigate solely based on your preference. One of those ways I actually want to point out, it's using something that we call tags, which I realize is not really that fancy of a term, but tags are sort of like labels or identifiers. So within your business, if there's something that, if there are categories or more so I should say like characteristics that you want to add to a client's profile, it could be like what type of business this person has, what type of client they are, what type of service you're providing for them. Essentially, the tags are a nice way for you to be able to filter through your client base. If you only, for example, wanted to filter down to people that are receiving a specific tax service, you can then press on this filter button and then sort of filter accordingly, and it'll isolate it to just those people. So that's completely optional, but I wanted to briefly mention that that's something you can do to kind of make sense of everybody in the mix. Without a doubt, the most time that anyone would spend within our system is just kind of toggling between the projects themselves. But before I dig in, I wanted to actually show everyone some templates that you can use, just depending on what your business calls for, whether there's a bit of an intake form, whether you schedule calls with them, whether you need them to sign some type of contract or agreement, things like that. So what you're all seeing now is actually our form template library. This is where you can actually create all the different documents that you would like to send to your clients over time. I do want to just sort of preface that they're all cloud-based. So just like a Dropbox folder or a Google Drive or something like that, they're all mobile friendly. So whoever is receiving these documents, even if they're on like an iPhone or a Samsung, whatever it might be, they can absolutely sign these and fill these out on their phone. And to take it a step further, I know in any industry, accounting, tax services, coaching, no less, branding I know is increasingly important. So I want to make sure I mention that customization is really key for us. If you have logos and fonts and company colors, and you can pretty much do everything you need to just to make sure that your branding translates and you look as professional as possible. First things first, I'll make sure to go down the list and show everyone what each form might entail, but I want to start off with one of the more standard ones, which is, of course, a contract or agreement. Now, what you're seeing now is actually an example of a digital contract in what we call edit mode. So basically, if you were to recreate an existing contract you're using, or perhaps you're creating a brand new one from scratch, all you're really doing, at least in the context of Dubsado, is you're using the elements on the right and then you're dragging and dropping what you find to be necessary. So in this case, you have like a logo, you got some terms and conditions, and then of course at the very bottom is that signature field, which I do want to point out is electronically binding. So essentially, if you email this over to a client, which I'll show everyone an example of, they'll have the full ability to sign that without having to download or scan or log in or print. It's very turnkey, so I'm hoping that this will eliminate any friction with someone not having access to like a printer or something like that. I will say, depending on what your preference is, there is the ability and the option to countersign, meaning for you to sign as the business owner. But I do want to highlight that it is optional. If you ultimately feel like you wanted to save the step, you didn't want to have to accommodate another step in your process, you can remove that altogether. In actuality, it's perfectly binding as long as the client themselves signed it. Now, I usually skip over this next form, but for this particular demographic, I want to make sure that I highlight we have something called a sub-agreement. So if there is ever a time or a need for you to gather a second signature for something that's not covered by your primary, it could be like an amendment to your services, it could be an addendum that you're adding on, it could be like a non-disclosure agreement if you're handling really confidential info. Whatever you feel is necessary, I just want you to know that you can create however many additional legal documents to cover every single base you might need over time if it's not already covered by the primary contract. So I can't express enough, there's not exactly a wrong way to use this, but I do want everyone to know that it is here and you can gather that extra signature whenever the time calls for it. Now, we have two forms that feel very similar. One of them is called a questionnaire, while the other one is called a lead capture form. So LaShawn had actually broke down with me some of the different ways that she might have gone about with her process and all the things that she would send to her clients, things like that. So I want to make sure that I emphasize whatever your process is, none of this is creed. If you feel like there's not a need for a secondary questionnaire, or if you feel like you want to start adding to that process, you can really sort of make do with it what you feel is like best and most appropriate. But I do want to mention that the difference between this sort of questionnaire and the lead capture, which I'll speak on in a few moments, this is sort of like your initial contact page. The first time someone might reach out about your business, this is ideally what you're going to want them to fill out, and I'll explain that in a moment. And for right now, I actually have a very random floral design questionnaire to show everyone. I realize that you're not floral designers, or maybe you can be in your spare time. But this is a great example of just how you can have a form that is intended for capturing as much info as possible. In this scenario, it would be like financial data, personal background info. Maybe you're just kind of vetting them or getting to know all their needs before you can perform your services. In any case, I just really wanted to highlight that you can be very particular. When you're designing a form like this, you can determine which questions are required, which ones are optional. Are we checking any boxes? Are we hitting yes or no? Things like that. Something that actually might be very, very hopefully beneficial with regard to sort of tax services or anything in adjacent fields is there's actually a file uploader. If you happen to drag this file uploader element into one of your forms, This is a really neat way for your clients to attach anything of significance that you need to collect. Perhaps instead of having to fill out, a questionnaire by just filling in the blanks or checking some boxes, if you need documents, you can request spreadsheets, photos, Word documents, anything like that that you feel is necessary to collect, and you can kind of sort of kill two birds in one stone. Last but not least about the questionnaire is that clients can save their progress. So, for example, if you feel like you're collecting a lot of info and the clients need to sort of sleep on it, they can't do it in one sitting, they can hit save draft on a questionnaire and they can come back to it later in case they need to, take a breather or take some time to gather all that information. Now, before I talk about the lead capture page, I wanted to sort of showcase something that we have called a proposal. Now, I know everyone who works in sort of tax services or accounting in general, I know that the services themselves and the way that they're presented or structured can really differ just depending on your preference. In this scenario, this proposal that I'm showing is really kind of like an order sheet or a shopping cart. So if you're someone where you've grouped your services into different sort of package levels, for example, let's say there's like a gold, a silver, and a bronze package that has like its own set of services in each one. You can even sort of upsell, if you have a la carte services or premium add-on services that you'd like for someone to elect to pay an additional fee for. The whole concept of this is to provide like a really nice visual where if there's not too much hand-holding involved and you do have those set rates, you can send this to a client actually, and this will give them the ability to select what they want to purchase, and that itself will actually create the invoice. Now, to take it a step further, and I promise I'll be showing everyone what this looks like, if you wanted to make things as turnkey as possible, like you truly didn't want to have too much hand-holding, you want to make sure that all your clients can kind of move down the process as efficiently as possible, this is again optional, but you do have the ability to select show contract and show invoice, and that will effectively give them the opportunity to, in one transaction, without you having to do anything, select what they want, sign the contract, and then pay either the entire amount that's due or whatever deposit you might require up front. I realize not everyone's services are done this way. Maybe there is a bit of hand-holding or a little bit of curating, or maybe you work on like an hourly or a recurring basis. But if this does fall into your wheelhouse, then hopefully this is a great tool that you can use to just make sure that people can essentially choose, sign, and pay as effectively as possible. And then last but not least, the lead capture page is probably one of the more important ones. This is just like a very weird way of saying contact page or inquiry form. So I can't emphasize enough, this will apply in any circumstance. If you have a website or if you're currently in the midst of building one, or let's say even if you do have a website, you get the majority of your inquiries from social media or referrals or anything like that. This is intended to be your primary contact page. So you'll have the opportunity to actually embed this on your website. So if you do embed it on a website, it's essentially going to replace your existing contact form, but it's designed to look identical. So if someone were to reach out, they were to go to your website as an example, if they had been there before, they won't be able to tell a difference. But the real sort of difference here is that as soon as they submit the document, at no point do you have to take info from your email and then translate it into Dubsado. So essentially this creates the lead project for you and nobody slips through the cracks, everyone's accommodated. In a different way, we have something called a direct link. And this is just like sharing any other link online. What's cool about it is you can actually customize the link to your business name or your personal name. And you can actually share this in any which way. If you put it on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, if you get like a random referral email, you can email this to someone or text it to someone. I can't emphasize enough, there's not exactly a wrong way to use this, but if you do get people to fill it out, of course, provided you've customized it to your liking, what it does is it creates that project folder for you and you don't have to worry about putting in customer details yourself. Before I actually show everyone what is created, which is that actual project folder, I know LaShawn had mentioned this prior, but if you are used to accepting consultation calls or maybe you have like a free 20-minute discovery call, maybe it's to get to know your client or whatever it might be, we do have actually a calendar and a built-in scheduler system. So I will talk about the calendar first because that's completely separate, and then I'll talk about sort of a booking scheduler, which is a way for clients essentially to book your time without having to worry about the back and forth. Um, so basically, we do have an internal calendar, I should say. So anything at all that has like a time frame or a due date, that'll be here by default. And then to take that a step further, you can actually connect to your online calendars if you happen to use one. If you have like an Outlook or a Google or um, an Apple Calendar even, if you choose to connect it, it's just to make things a bit easier so you can see things easily in both places. And then again, to take it a step further, we do have a scheduler which functions very similar to Acuity or Calendly. So in this scenario, I want to point out that you can create as many types of appointments and scheduler templates, as we'd call it, as you might need. So let's say, for example, this is designed to be your free 20-minute consultation call for first-time inquiries or something like that. Basically, what you're doing is you're kind of assembling all the parameters. What is your basic availability? Like what times on what days. You can take it a step further. You can identify like how far in advance can someone book my time? How many appointments do I even want to take in a day so I don't burn out? Also, is this free or is this something that's entirely paid for? They need to make some sort of deposit in order to be able to book it. Now, once you kind of hash out all those parameters, this is something as well that you can choose how you want to share it. If this is meant to be publicly available, you can actually share this the same exact way you would your contact page. So you can embed it on a website if applicable, but you can also customize and share the links to your scheduler on your socials or elsewhere. And just to show everyone a concrete example of what this will look like, for example, if this was my consultation scheduler, someone would literally go to it and I see kind of, okay, Thursday the 11th sounds great, 9:30 a.m. my time, that also sounds good. And then just based on the requisites that are set up, the client themselves will just fill out all their customer information and they'll get a confirmation email where they can confirm the booking details, they can add it to their calendar. There's a location field as well, I should mention. You can put like a physical location, of course, or if virtual, which I know is very applicable right now. You can most definitely like put like a Zoom link in there or a Skype session in there, whatever you feel is you're needing at the moment. Again, one thing I will say is apart from basic client information, if there's supplemental things you need, like if there's an invoice to pay because it's a paid session, or if there's like a contract to sign or another document for them to fill out, you can actually put that into your template for your scheduler. So part of that booking process is actually the ability to have them fill out another form. One thing I'll say is, again, you can create different types of schedulers, things like that. But if you are someone that works very much virtually, when someone is booking a time with you, it will luckily follow their native time zone. So for example, if you're on the East Coast and your client's on the West Coast, they might book a 9:30 slot that looks like 9:30 to them, but on your calendar it reads as 12:30, so you don't have to worry about any kind of discrepancy. With that being said, I can finally show everyone essentially what happens when somebody fills out that lead capture form, that contact page that I showed you all earlier. So let me go ahead and show everyone a project and sort of what that entails. Essentially, let's say someone were to go to a website and then fill out the contact page that you've embedded there. What that does is it creates a project folder that looks identical to this. Our sort of like philosophy, I should say, is we want everything to be really easy to locate. So especially if you're in a really busy season, you don't have to necessarily worry about tax season, of course. You don't have to necessarily worry about where to locate something because everything is automatically stored into these individual buckets that we call projects. So as soon as someone fills out a contact form, it creates this project, and from that point on, this is how you'll interact with your client, whether they become a client or not, by the way. But a really good way of iterating that is actually connecting your emails. So for example, if you happen to use like Outlook or G Suite or any email, it could be GoDaddy or Yahoo or otherwise, if you choose to connect it to Dubsado, we're not replacing it. So I should say like you can still send and receive as you typically do in your normal inbox, but we do want to make it easier to navigate, you know. So again, if you are in that really, really busy season and you don't want to have to create a bunch of subfolders or dig through your inbox, stuff like that, it's very much sort of like, okay, if I need to talk to Drew, then all I do is I'll go to Drew's project and then I'm just filling out all the details here, and I can actually see all the emails that are specifically between me and Drew, and I don't have to look elsewhere. So again, it's sort of meant so you don't have to create those subfolders. It's just a matter of going to someone's project, and that's where all of his or her emails are, and then everyone else's emails are in their own project. A couple things that I'll mention about this is that we're not masking it, you know, so it's never going to say like Dubsado mailer. You can format everything the exact same, so at least on the client end, it looks identical to if you were to have sent it from like Gmail or Outlook as an example. You know, one thing I'll say is this is just kind of like a quality of life thing, but we do have read receipts. If someone's a little bit hard to get a hold of, especially if you need some information from them, especially if you're trying to meet a deadline or something like that, you can actually confirm if someone has opened your email in case you need to follow up with them or give them a call or something like that. Now, when we're sending documents, so in this case specifically forms that are intended for signing or filling out, all we're really doing is in that same sort of project view, we're clicking on this Forms tab, and then in this drop-down menu is where you'll see all the different templates that you've created. Now, this is kind of overkill, but essentially when you add forms from that list, you'll see each one of them populate as a bit of a tile or a square like you're seeing now. Simply adding it to the project, I should say, does not actually send it automatically, but it does sort of queue it up for you. So I wanted to show you all an example of how you can manually add a form and then go ahead and send that. But I will most definitely be speaking about how you can automate. I would say automation is one of the larger things in Dubsado, and hopefully would be the biggest time saver in terms of just eliminating that admin work or really any kind of process that you feel might be redundant or is taking up too much of your time. But just to illustrate, you know, let's say I wanted to go ahead and send over a questionnaire. Let's say this is a financial questionnaire of sorts. I'd scroll over the document and then I'd find this button that says send, which is where you'll see this email box. This is a sort of very generic example, but once you deck it out, you know, with like your company colors, your signature, everything like that, the only thing that the client is ever responsible for is they can click on that button there and it takes them to a new window in their browser for them to fill out and submit when they're ready. So again, this does not require any sort of download or login, and they can do so entirely on their phone if that's all they have. One thing I'll quickly mention as well is that each form that you have within this sort of area for each project has a status. So you don't have to actually do anything for these to update, but it is just kind of nice to be able to hop onto somebody's project and then see what's going on. This is where you can automatically identify like, okay, when did I send this, or when did they last open or work on it, and then if it's completed, you'll see that sort of green status symbol that indicates it's done. But yeah, just kind of a nice way to see what's going on in case you need to follow up with your clients. As promised, I wanted to actually show everyone an example of a proposal that you might be able to use. Again, this is more so pertaining to if you have flat rate services or packages or anything of that nature. But essentially, this is an example of a proposal that is entirely filled out already, but has the contract and has the actual invoice attached automatically. So you'll see here that it's one window, but it has 3 different tabs. So if this was like your services menu almost, I as a client could actually go through it and then choose, okay, I want this package, I want this service, and then as soon as I'm done choosing that, it'll route me to the contract where it'll show me everything I've chosen, and then I can sign and then move forward. And then as a final measure, of course, there's that invoice where I'll be able to pay either the entire sum if it's due up front or whatever type of deposit you might require. The invoicing I'll definitely get into right after this, by the way. You know, one thing I just want to briefly mention with using something like a proposal, if you do operate, let's say, on like an hourly basis, or if there's anything to be quantified, you can actually toss in a quantity box. Like let's say there's like an additional add-on for like extra hours of labor or whatever it might be. You can have someone enter in however many additional hours, and you can actually have like a minimum or a maximum threshold. You know, let's say you're not able to take any more than 4 hours of additional labor, then 4 would be sort of the cap that they're able to enter. So I just want you to know that it's flexible in that regard. So speaking of invoicing, I do want to mention that we do integrate with a few different payment processors. If you're okay to accept credit card, we do have PayPal, Square, and Stripe that we're integrated with, and you can connect that to Dubsado. Just right off the bat, all three of them have the same exact transaction fee, which is 2.9%. We don't take any additional fees on top of that. So I want you to know if you actually charge someone using a connected processor, nothing from that sum is going to Dubsado. That's solely the transaction fee of the processor itself. If you're within the US, there are some sort of perks, I will say. Stripe in particular offers a really sweet way for you to collect payment from someone online, but also not make it as expensive as it can be. I know, like, whatever the service might cost, in my opinion, for example, if you're charging me $500 and 2.9% of that 500 is going to the processor, I know that that's still money on the table. So I wanted to show everyone an example of what Stripe is able to do in order to sort of limit the transaction fees. Essentially, Stripe has another form of payment that's called e-checks. And e-checks are really great because they're sort of like a direct deposit or an ACH transfer. So for example, if this was the actual invoice that you had sent to me as your client, I can navigate to the Pay Now button at the bottom, and that's where I'll see that e-check available. What's really sweet about it is the transaction fee on your end is actually only 0.8% and it's capped at $5. So even your most expensive service, let's say it's over $1,000, if someone were to pay via e-check, then the transaction fee on your end again is capped at $5, 0.8% up to it. So in my opinion, that's definitely better than paying 2.9, close to 3% on the entire sum. If you are someone that accepts other form of payments, like something like let's say it's like a Cash App or Venmo or a physical check or a direct deposit externally or anything like that, I want you to know that you can still use our invoicing. Like, even if you only accept checks or cash or whatever it might be, if you happen to send an invoice to a client, let's say for whatever amount, and then they mail you a check, just as an example, I want to point out that you always have the ability to hit this button here that says apply payment, and then you can actually manually specify the method, the amount, and then the date that you received it. I think the biggest thing is that the invoice is live. Sorry for the long pause, but essentially any changes you make to the invoice will automatically update on the client's behalf. You don't need to send any revised copies ever. So if you happen to apply a check you got in the mail, if you happen to give someone a bit of a discount, or if you need to add some more line items that you're charging more for, anything you do internally will automatically update externally for the client that already has that one version of the invoice. But just to cover all the bases, I wanted to kind of break down, if you do not collect a lump sum, there's actually ways that you can break down that sum. So for example, if you're charging someone $1,000, maybe you're only going to need 500 of that up front and then the remaining balance later, whatever that entails. You can absolutely use what we call a payment schedule to kind of iterate that. So basically, if I iterate 50% is due up front and then the remaining 50% is due a week prior to completion or something like that, when you spell out what the payment deadlines are for the client, it actually shows them explicitly on the invoice. Because they'll always have the ability to see, like, okay, I have the overall total that I'm responsible to pay at the bottom, which I can if I'm able. But if not for anything else, I have this payment schedule here, which will show me, okay, I'm only going to need to pay this amount on this day, and then the remaining amount is due on another day. And mind you, you can break that up into more payments. It doesn't have to be like a 50-50 scenario, but just as an example. So yeah, I know that invoicing is very nuanced and it really just depends on how you structure your services, things like that. For everyone that might do hourly billing or something like that, I want you to know that we do have a time tracker. Essentially, under the utilities menu, there's this section here where you can literally track the time for one of two purposes. You can track time just so you are aware of how much labor you're spending on a given client, or if you actually bill by the hour, you can use this as well for that purpose. But basically, it's very simplified. All you're really doing is you're kind of laying out, like, what is it that I'm working on. Under the project section, this is where you choose which client it's for. And then you'll just kind of specify all the parameters of, like, how much are you charging, things like that. You can actually physically start and stop time, like in real time here if you wanted to. But let's say, for example, you weren't quite able to log into Dubsado, but you know for a fact you did 3-4 hours of labor for this one client. You do have the ability to retroactively apply any sort of labor that you might have done prior to. And what it does is it actually just aggregates in this list here. So if it is just for personal use, you can leave it here. It doesn't have to have any invoice implications. But like this example that I'm showing you here, if this is a billable item, all you have to do is hit apply to invoice, and it'll automatically add that time track line item to your invoice automatically. So yeah, invoicing, it's really sort of up to how you would prefer to collect payment and sort of process that. So even if you don't take online payment, or if you do, there's always a way to kind of accommodate that and use that in Dubsado. One thing that I really wanted to point out before I sort of wrap up and hopefully offer some resources is automation, which I know LaShawn is most definitely a big fan of. If you feel like you have a bit of a process involved where you feel like there's something that you do very routinely to kind of help out a client or sort of onboard them. Onboarding is actually a really good example of this. So for example, if you get an inquiry and you kind of know in your head, okay, if they ask about service A or B or C, I already kind of know all the different emails and forms that I would send to them automatically. What you're doing here is you're putting as much of that as possible into autopilot. So for example, if I asked about service A and you know for a fact, okay, if they do this, I want to actually send them a thank you email with my appointment scheduler. If they book an appointment, I want to send them my questionnaire, and so on and so forth. A list of actions, as you're seeing now, is kind of like a visual example of what you're doing in your head. So essentially, you're creating these individual actions where you'll see this sort of pop-up window, and the action itself, I should say, is not too hard to determine. Like, it's just a matter of, am I sending an email or a form, or my scheduler link as a good example. But what I really want to narrow in on is the when section. Instead of having to actually mess around with the dates and the times for every single client or inquiry, what happens here is we use something called triggers. So hopefully this is like a really nice way for you to know that things are sending at the right time. Essentially, it's sort of like, oh, okay, you can make things happen based on what was done prior, just depending on your process. It could be like, oh, they signed the contract, send the invoice. They paid the deposit, send the questionnaire. They filled out the questionnaire, give them a call. So it really is and truly based on what you know your process to be, but as much as feasibly possible, if you do put it into this sort of workflow sequence, then you don't have to worry about it down the line, and you never have to worry that your client is getting what they need at any given time. Especially if you have deadlines to meet, this is also a really great way to automate reminders. Let's say someone is contracting you for your services and you're going to work with them for a few months, and there's a lot of sort of prep up until you're done working with them. You have the ability to say, like, okay, if I'm going to work with them all the way up until let's say like March 1st or whatever it might be, leading up to March 1st, if you were to use it as like an example target date, you can say like, okay, send a reminder email 6 weeks prior to March 1st, 2 weeks prior to March 1st, and then a week prior. So even down the line, if you anticipate there's anything you want to remind them of or send them as they move forward, you can fully automate that, so everything is very much relative to where they're at in the process. And just to show everyone like a really concrete example of how you can sort of tie all that together, sort of make everything automated from the jump, is taking you all back to this lead capture page, which again is just like a really funky way of saying contact form. What happens here is essentially you have this one element that is specifically called workflow as well. And essentially, this is like a question you're going to ask someone so you can identify why they're inquiring, whether it be what service are you interested in, or what's the nature of your inquiry or something of that nature. So basically all the options that you might approve of and then provide for them. On the back end, you can identify which workflow will trigger. So what that does, just to break it down, is as soon as they choose whatever option and they hit submit on the form, not only will it put them into the system, but it will automate an entire chain of emails and forms and whatever's necessary specific to their inquiry type. So if I asked about service like A versus B or C, I might get something totally different and sort of curtailed to what it is that I'm inquiring about. So a lot of this is just about keeping things in one place and then hopefully automating all the things that you feel like you're spending too much time on. Again, I really want to emphasize that there is not a wrong way to use this. It really and truly is dependent on your process and just sort of what your business needs. I do encourage you all to create a bit of a trial if you would like to. The trial, I should say, is not time restricted. So instead of having, let's say, like 15 or 30 days to figure it out, you can create a trial as soon as you'd like to and take all the time you need to kind of assess what is helpful for you and sort of put those puzzle pieces together. One thing that I'll emphasize too is that customer support is really, really important to us. So as you're kind of digging into it and making your assessments, there's a lot of resources online. There's like guides and tutorials, but also real people. If you wanted to give us a call, if you wanted to chat with us, if you wanted to book a one-on-one screen share, those are all things that are entirely free and available while you're on trial, just kind of seeing if it fits or if it works for you or is at the very least helpful. So yeah, I hope that you were able to take even a small couple of gems from this, and I wanted to just quickly say thank you to LaShawn for the opportunity. I hope you all have a great day, and yeah, let us know how you're all doing. Thanks so much.